Hello there and welcome. I'm Alan Willison, the chairman of the Hartford Astronomy Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's meeting. Lots of familiar faces in the audience and a few new ones, which I'm really pleased to see as well. And some of you are probably also looking at a new face down here, which is very nice. First of all, to those of you who are new, do make sure you speak to either myself or to other members of the committee. We don't want you to go away thinking we're not a very friendly group. We do like to get to know our members, so do make sure you do that. For those of you in the university, can I ask that you just check that your phones are switched to silent, vibrate, whatever, so they don't disturb the meeting. And for those of you on Zoom, can I ask that you keep your hands away from the space bar and that you keep your computers muted all the time. Those of you at the university, we're not expecting to practice the fire alarm, so if it does go off, please leave the building safely through the doors there, follow the signs, gather on the car park, and we will just check everybody is safe. Toilets are just outside. I'm sure the gents, I think, are the first ones at this end and go along a little bit further for disabled and ladies' toilets out there. We've got a little bit of a different evening tonight. Instead of Martin giving the talk to tell us about the night sky, we've got one of our members doing that, John Fraser. So that's going to be something nice to look forward to. Following that, Dennis O'Shea is going to give you a little 5-minute talk about Haggas, about our astrophotography section, because we've got some exciting stuff coming up in that. After that, we're going to pass over to Jerry, who's going to introduce tonight's speaker, and there will be time after the talk to ask questions. So if I could ask you please to keep your questions until the end so that we can pass amongst you, give you the microphone so that the people on Zoom will be able to hear the questions as well. For those of you on Zoom, if you've got a question, could you type it into the chat box and then someone down here will be able to read it out to the speaker. After the talk and the questions, I've got just a couple of announcements which will be of interest to you. So if you can just hang on for another 5 minutes, I'm sure that you'll find it worthwhile. We aim to finish around about 9:35, so if you've got plans later on in the evening, you know how that's going to work with your timetable. So, no more from me. I'm now going to pass you over to John, who's going to tell us about the night sky. So, over to you.
Right, okay, here we go. Fantastic. So I'm quickly going to go through the night sky this month, the news, mainly the news that caught my eye, and what we might expect in the next month. Unfortunately, the problem I have with this is it automatically advances, and I'm on an account here where I can't edit it because I've left this work logged in with my work account. So you'll have to bear with me, it'll keep flicking backwards and forwards. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Okay, so very quickly, the moon. The moon is new this month. It's going to... this weekend. It's new most months. It's going to head towards full by the 28th of October, and just before the next meeting we're back to the third quarter. We've got a partial lunar eclipse on the 29th. Now, about 6% of the moon is going to be in the umbra of the Earth, but the whole moon will be in the penumbra. You get a nice colour change. Sometimes it looks better than others. The weather looks like it's going to be not great, unfortunately. The clocks go back on the 22nd. Winter is coming, although the week we've had, I find it hard to believe. Also, I think it's one of the few groups on Earth where you can say winter's coming and everyone feels like, yes, long nights, long dark nights, okay. I look at the weather forecast, doesn't seem to be any good weather coming up in the next month. I think there is this weekend, actually. Okay, so quickly going through the planets. The Mercury's just out of sight, far too close to the sun. Mars is heading behind the sun, and it's going to actually get right behind it in November, so we're not going to be seeing it for quite a few months yet. Venus. Now, Venus is definitely up. It's coming up at about 3 a.m, so it's the morning star at the moment. It's near Leo, it's just under Leo, and Leo is a great constellation to me because it's one of the few that I can spot almost anywhere I am. The curve of the head of the lion, the curve of the head of the lion's easy to spot. It's one of the few constellations that actually looks like what it's supposed to look like. But to be honest, at -4.5 magnitude, you're going to find Leo with Venus. It's going to be beautifully bright. Gets its furthest point from the sun on the 23rd towards the end of the month. So it's just going to keep getting brighter. Okay, Jupiter and Uranus are, oh God, I'm a little long-sighted and I can't quite see what's on the screen there. So I think I'm talking about one slide and the other one's on. So I'll look up with you guys. Unfortunately, my notes are down there. Okay, so Jupiter, Uranus. Now, these are sitting between Taurus and Cetus, okay? They form a lovely line with the Pleiades. Jupiter's going to be bright. I mean, it's magnitude, I've got it written down, I can't read it, -2.86. It's going to be the brightest thing after the Moon and Venus in the sky. It's going to be very, very easy to find. The Pleiades are a lovely globular cluster in Taurus. Beautiful to look at through binoculars. And they're almost in a straight line. If you don't recognise the Pleiades by sight, Orion is just to the bottom left. You can just see the arrow of the hunter coming on the screen. And the belt of Orion points beautifully at the Pleiades. Really easy pointer to follow. Halfway across, bit of star hopping, bit of scanning. You probably get quite a nice view of it. Jupiter is going to go to opposition on the 3rd of November, so it's going to be nice and bright. It's going to be lovely to see. Okay. We also get, the moon gets very, very close to Jupiter just before, I think, sunrise on the 29th of October. It's going to be mostly a crescent moon. Okay, so Saturn and Neptune. Saturn's very bright. Neptune's never bright. I was remembering years ago, I met a guy who claimed he'd seen Neptune with the naked eye, which theoretically is possible because it goes to about 7, and a dark sky you obviously won't see it here. But Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter, Uranus and the Pleiades form a lovely straight line across about a quarter of the sky during the month. You might get an opportunity to see it. I've actually never seen it, not even through a telescope. All right. So, moving on, the news. So the New Horizons mission got extended. So they're going to keep it going until it gets to the Kuiper Belt, which should be about 2029. It gave us these fantastic images of Pluto, with I think that's the Sputnik plateau, the heart-shaped one, the Kepler object, and I can never remember the name of this, Arakoth, which it flew past. It is almost certain not to fly past any other objects. I mean, it won't. They're not even, I don't think they're even going to look for it. It's going to be doing science until about 2029. But it's nice that such an important mission is carrying on. Right, this actually made the main news, I think. The OSIRIS-REx landed. It came back from Bennu, which is basically a rubble pile. 250 grams of material were brought back, which I think worked out about £4 million a gram. Now this is a really important scientific mission because we get lots of meteors hit the Earth, but as soon as they hit the atmosphere, we've got an oxygen-rich atmosphere. Oxygen is an incredibly reactive element. We've got moisture. They heat up as they pass through. This is so important in learning about how the solar system was built. Really, really important mission. Right, JWST never fails to disappoint. This is a beautiful picture, absolutely wonderful picture of the Orion Nebula that came out this month. What's addition to this is they found, I think it was 540 rogue planets without stars in this image. And these come from about, I think, 3/4 Jupiter size upwards. I have heard estimates that basically say there are more planets wandering around the galaxy without a star than there are orbiting stars. But the other interesting thing about this is 40 of the planets were in binary pairs. I know there was 80 planets in 40 pairs, or 20 pairs with 40 planets. The maths, I don't think they know how a planet can be ejected in a pair out of a solar system. So, I mean, I certainly don't, and the maths would be well beyond me. But there was a lot of puzzlement there. Okay, the last one was the Gaia 3 data got released a little while ago, and examining the orbital speed of globular clusters around the Milky Way, and I think neutral hydrogen clouds, they're not moving fast enough. And the conclusion is that the Milky Way weighs about 20% of what it was thought to weigh, considerably smaller, 1/5 the size. Now, I don't know whether this paper's been properly peer-reviewed or gone through, but I found it very interesting. It's not a case of they're overestimating all galaxies, because you can quite easily work out the orbital speed of the rotational speed of a galaxy. If you see the whole thing, much more difficult to work out the orbital speed of a galaxy when you're in the middle of it. I think it's watch this space on that, but I just found it interesting. I'm not pretending this is all the news. There's an awful lot more news. This was just things that caught my eye, and I remember them when I came down to when I sat down to write this. So the month ahead, we've had one asteroid mission come back. I think on the 14th, the Psyche mission is going out to 16th Psyche, which is an asteroid between Jupiter and Saturn. It's very different. It's not a rock pile. It's solid iron nickel. It's due to arrive in about 2029, about time the New Horizons one get to the Kepler belt. This is an M-type asteroid. I think it was originally believed to be the core of a rocky planet, but I don't think that's the prevailing theory anymore. We've got an annular eclipse. This is the annular eclipse, where the moon is a bit closer. You don't get the sun fully blocked out, but you get the fantastic ring of fire. This is happening 2 weeks before the lunar eclipse, because you get a lunar eclipse 2 weeks or two weeks before or 2 weeks after a solar eclipse. This one is invisible from here. There is a total eclipse on April next year, 8th of April, and I know that date so well because Fiona and I have booked up to go and see it, and it's going to be a trip of a lifetime. It's definitely one off our bucket list. Okay, the Orionids, I think they've started. They peak about the 21st to 22nd of October. This is the remains of Halley's Comet, or rather the cloud of dust that follows Halley's Comet around the solar system. We go through it. I think it's about 20 meters an hour. It's unfortunately looks like the weather's not going to be good, and I think we've got 3/4 of a moon by that date, so it's not going to be ideal. A tip for any meteor shower, for people who don't know: look anywhere except where the meteors are supposed to originate from, which in this case is Orion, hence the name. They originate from there if you trace their trails back, but you'll see more of them looking anywhere. If we do get a nice night, it could be good. As I mentioned, Venus, greatest western elongation. It's actually quite nice looking at Venus through binoculars and watching the phases. Partial lunar eclipse I mentioned, and we get Jupiter reaching its opposition 3rd of November. Will we get a Starship launch? We could almost start a betting pool on that, a sweepstake as to when we'll get one again. Actually, I used to do those at work. I'm always tempted to do one of those again. Okay. I spent a long time looking at the astrophotography group's pictures, and I am in total awe of these guys. These images are wonderful. I was saying to Martin earlier, these are better than the images I used to get in my astronomy books when I was a young man, which admittedly was a very, very long time ago. Okay, so this is one of Martin's. This is the Pillars of Creation. So everyone knows this from the Hubble image, but this is an amazing image. He actually took it 3-4 years ago from Spain, but recently reprocessed it, and I thought you I saw that and I thought, I've got to show that, because that is such a picture. So this is one of Steve's, Saturn, Cassini division, looking fantastic on that. Lovely angle on the rings. The rings are going to get narrower as Saturn continues on its journey, and I did write it down. Sometime around September 25, there'll be a line, and then the southern hemisphere of Saturn will move into summer, probably about as warm as the summer we've just had, and the rings will open up again for the next few years. But that is yeah. Okay, so this is another one of Martin's, the Cygnus Loop. This is a supernova remnant. It's huge. It's 3 degrees across, which is about 6 times the width of the full moon. And it's about, I think, 1,700 light years distance. Wonderful picture. I just think I should just put more pictures up and shut up and just show you them. They're wonderful. Okay, so this is another one from Steve. This is the Sun. I think this is really, really something for showing you what an active star we have. I enjoy, I don't do astrophotography, but I enjoy photography, and the composition of this is fantastic. The sunspots on the left, the 2 flares on the right, and the sheer scale of it by that the horizon being almost a straight line. Wonderful picture. Okay, this is one of Peter Goodrich's. This is a planetary nebula, Abel 74. I've got to admit, I've never heard of it until I saw this picture, but it's a lovely, lovely planetary nebula. Planetary nebulas happen, if you don't know, stars like our sun start casting off their atmosphere when they're burning helium, and it expands outward into the galaxy. This is a very old one. They don't last all that long. I think they only go through this stage for a few million years, which by the scale of a star is not much. It's unusual. Can you guys see that right? Because it seems a bit bright for me. Okay. It's unusual for one to be this perfectly shaped. As they expand, they get disrupted by the gravity of other stars, objects. So it's very unusual to have this so perfect. This is really, really faint. You can see this, that Peter said it was nearly 31 hours of exposure to get this picture, but totally worth it, absolutely totally worth it. I don't know if I'm 10 to 1 well over, I apologise. Okay, that's me done.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions? Please say no.
Can you do it again next month?
No, not so much a question as an observation. If the Milky Way really only contains that little amount of mass, then I would imagine that means a lot regarding dark mass and dark energy.
I'm not an astronomer, I'm not a scientist. It's funny you should say that though, because some of the explanations I've seen is that, actually, can they hear me at home?
Yes.
All right. Is that it is a problem with dark matter. We may be deficient in dark matter in the Milky Way, because we can see a good section of it, and it doesn't appear that we're missing the normal matter. I haven't seen anyone come up with MOND, because this doesn't really affect anything but the Milky Way. Personally, if I was putting a bet on this, and I don't bet, but if I did put a bet on this, I think this will get revisited. I think they'll find out where, give or take, roughly what they thought. But I just thought it was an interesting and surprising observation.
Okay, question No, you're not getting away.
Definitely knows what it means.
Right. Less a question than an observation from today's Radio 4 News. It was at lunchtime and I think at supper time, was that they're getting the OSIRIS-REx stuff out, and they already think they've found organic matter amongst what they've got there. So watch this space for how life developed.
Fred Hoyle will be cheering.
Well, again, can we just say thank you very much indeed to John? Thank you. And he didn't answer the last question thrown out from the floor. Do you want to do it next month? He'll come back to us on that one. By the way, if there are other people who do fancy, coming down, doing a little bit like that, do let us know. It's your club as much as ours, so do let us know about that. We saw some wonderful pictures. During that presentation taken by our astrophotography group. And to tell us a little bit more about their up-and-coming events, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. To give you a little bit of history, HAGAS stands for Hartford Astronomy Group Astrophotography Section. Okay. And it was about 7 or 8 years ago this thing got started. I was membership secretary at the time, and I was talking to different people as we are today, but I could be talking to over there, whatever, and people were talking about doing photography, but it's like you were 30 or 40 yards apart. So I thought the best thing to do is try and get everybody together, and we actually did, and we formed the actual section. And since then, it's just gone on, and you can see from the standard of the pictures that you've seen today, and in previous ones that Martin has done for us, the standard is extremely high. So much so that we've got certain speakers who've come along and have actually joined at the club as well, because they are aware of just how good these guys are. So, to bring it into a nutshell for you, we have a meeting at a place called the Stanbridge, which is in Hoddesdon. The next one is next Tuesday on the 17th, and we've got a chap called Glenn Clowder. Clowder? And he's known as Astro Bloke on YouTube channel. Now, I've had a little look at that over the last 24 hours, and he's put some interesting stuff on there to have a look at. So we'll be meeting at the Stanbridge Club next Tuesday. Glenn will actually be here in person, so he'll be actually delivering his presentation to us. The next one after that is a guy called Patrick Cosgrove. Now, you probably have never heard of him, because he lives in New York. And following on from the one we did with a guy called Bob Burkett, I don't know if Bob is on tonight, but happy birthday if it is. It's his birthday today. He lives in New Mexico, and he did a very good presentation for us as well. Following on from that, we've now got one coming in from New York, and it'll be a guy called Patrick Cosgrove. Very keen astrophotographer, prolific creator of online documentation, etc., and also has a YouTube channel. Details of this will come up on the website anyway, so you'll be able to follow it as it goes down. Late in January next year, these will be on a Tuesday, because we used to be on a Wednesday. I've had to change to Tuesday because we can't get the, should we say, someone else has now actually booked first, third and fifth Wednesdays of the month. So we thought the best thing to do was change to Tuesday. So this will be later on in January, and it'll be Hannah Rochford, and she's won the St Patrick Moore Prize for Best Newcomer in Astrophotography in the year ending 22. And I've seen images actually in Greenwich from her last year when I was down there. And then we'll be bringing up some other items as well, which we are looking at. All these things obviously take time to book. We have to get people in, etc. But it looks like we'll be doing more and more on Zoom, because it's obviously easier to get people to talk straight away, don't have to travel, etc. So that could be the way we're going, especially as we don't want to fly someone in from New York and pay those all the expenses. So we've also got, we'll be going back to a couple of our friends, Peter Goodhue, who you saw one of his photographs come up there, and David Davis as well. We'll be in touch with them, and they'll be coming along and doing some talks as well. So that's a little bit of a roundup for HAGAS.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much, Dennis. It must be lovely to see how your baby has grown over the years, isn't it?
It's better that the guys here
Well, keep up the good work, all of you. It's really great. Okay, then that brings us to tonight's speaker, and I'm going to hand over to Jerry, who's going to do the introductions. So, Jerry, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Okay. I do have one other observation regarding OSIRIS-REx, which was mentioned on the London BBC News this evening, that some of the samples from this asteroid are going to be distributed around the world, including the UK. It's of special interest to me because as a mission supporter, my name is on the spacecraft. So there we go. So a few hundred years ago, somebody worked on calculations of observations of comets that had taken place in the past and realized that they weren't all individual items but a recurring object, which was given his name. So I accept that it's generally known as Halley's Comet or Halley's Comet. However, before the 1986 appearance, I came across a little poem which read, of all the comets in the sky, there's none so great as Halley's. We'll see it when it next comes by, but this time rather poorly. And the rhyme explaining the allegedly correct pronunciation of the name. I dare say our speaker tonight might have another way of saying it, but I'll leave that to him. So before the 1986 presentation, which was covered by a number of spacecraft which flew past the comet, including one from the European Space Agency called Giotto, named after the artist who painted a picture of the Adoration of the Magi, I believe, with a comet in the sky, which was actually Halley's Comet. At that time, we knew quite a lot about comets. However, in the previous encounter in 1910, things were very different, and our speaker tonight is going to tell us how the 1910 appearance of the comet almost destroyed civilization. So will you please welcome Joseph Goodrich.
My name is Richard Goodrich. I'm not from around here. And I have to confess that Jerry has me so confused now. I don't know how to pronounce the title of my paper. I was very chuffed because I was pointing out to Americans and other people that the proper pronunciation was not like Bill Haley and the Comets, the famous rock and roll band, which is why most Americans pronounce it Halley's Comet, but actually Halley, and now Halley. Oh boy, I don't know. I'm going to stick with Halley, sorry. We'll see where I go. So I would like to talk to you tonight about the 1910 return of Halley's Comet and why this was such a traumatic episode for many people at that time. And to begin, a little poem. 8 things a comet always brings: wind, famine, plague, and death to kings, war, earthquakes, floods, and dire things. This is an old German school child's rhyme. So from the 18th, 19th century, you might go running down the street chanting it to yourself if you thought maybe a comet was coming. But these were the things that were typically associated with the advent of a comet. This might be a little more familiar to you. I saw and behold a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. From the book of Revelations, chapter 6:8. And many people believe that this is a reference. What am I going on here? This is a reference to the comet, or to a comet. Well, I want to begin my discussion tonight with a little consideration of the question, are humans rational beings? Or what are the limits of our rationality, in fact? And I am, by discipline, training, academic orientation, my PhD is in ancient history. So I worked on Roman history, early church history. And it is absolutely impossible for a classicist or an ancient historian to do any sort of presentation whatsoever, even if it's millennia removed from his own topic, without working the classical world in somehow. And as you can see, I cleverly have done that. On the left side, we have Socrates, the exemplar of human rationality, the thinking man. And then on the right, we have the Roman god Bacchus. Irrationality, appeal to our base natures, drunkenness, carousing, wild parties, you name it, Bacchus has it. So the question is, are humans rational or are they not? Have we evolved past our primitive irrationality and become thinking creatures? Well, this was put to the test in April of 1910 in a thought experiment run by the Pittsburgh Post, so an American newspaper, pitted two theologians, local city theologians, Reverend Rudolph Coffey and Reverend Albert Diefenbach. And they asked these two men a question. If a comet was bearing down upon the Earth, and if it was going to smash into our planet and destroy us all, would humans behave rationally or irrationally? Reverend Coffey had the more difficult case to make because he was the defender of human rationality. And Coffey's argument was simply that we have evolved over time and as we have grown more civilized, and now rationality rules us. And so if we were placed in this terrible circumstance, we would be a bit like Socrates, facing our end calmly, like rational thinking creatures. We would, in essence, drink our hemlock and lay down on our cot and contemplate the final things. He predicted that this sort of disaster would provoke a reorientation in our lives. So we would turn from our normal secular concerns that preoccupy us and fill our days, and we begin to think about the spiritual, the hereafter, the eternal verities. Churches would fill as people got their lives right with God, and we would, in the end, just sort of ride out the storm in calm, peace, and tranquility, knowing that this can't possibly be the end, and better things are coming. Well, Albert Diefenbach, the defender of human irrationality, his position could probably be summarized in 3 words: stuff and nonsense. Diefenbach believed that if we found out we were all about to die, we would go nuts. We would just go completely mad. A return to religion? Hardly. If we found out that this was going to happen, we would turn our backs on God. What kind of evil, vindictive creator would do such a thing to his creation? And so the churches would empty as people poured out into the streets and engaged in Epicurean bacchanalias, and there would be just an immediate collapse of law and society. The strong would prey on the weak, and the weak would be defenseless. Law would cease to exist. Why would the police come to arrest you for a crime, knowing that we're all going to be killed in a month or so? It wouldn't happen. In fact, argued Diefenbach, what would be miraculous is if, by the time the comet returned, anybody still survived. That would be a miracle. Because he would imagine we would all just destroy each other before it could even get here. Well, this is a thought experiment, of course, but it does have a practical application in that within a month, Halley's Comet was going to make its closest approach to the Earth, and it had given some people cause for concern. Here it is, the disturber of the peace, Halley's Comet coming in. You're all astronomers. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. You know much more about this than I do. But for anybody who's not an astronomer, Halley's Comet makes its orbit about roughly every 75 years. And so its period does vary just a little bit depending on gravitational influences as it's passing through the solar system. It had previously come in 1835, and it was due back in 1910. And one thing that intrigues me when I was thinking about this for the book is just think about how the world changed scientifically and technologically between 1835 and 1910. In 1835, when Halley's Comet had previously come by, it passed over a world that probably wouldn't have shocked a Roman if you could bring one forward in time. Things had changed, of course, but not dramatic changes. In 1835, Americans were beginning to cross the continent in covered wagons, heading for the West Coast. In 1910, they rode in railways, on railroad cars. They rode horses in 1835, automobiles in 1910. Humans had taken flight, so 1903, Orville and Wilbur made the first flights, and by 1910, airplanes were becoming far more common. Steamships had replaced sailing vessels for transporting cargoes across the sea in that period as well. So there had been a huge dramatic change. In the summer of 1909, astronomers around the planet began a fierce competition to see who would be the first to see the returning comet. And so all telescopes were pointed to the sky because we didn't know exactly where it would appear against the night sky, or exactly when it would first become visible. Betting money, smart betting money, rode on this man. This is Professor Max Wolf of Heidelberg University. He was a master of astrophotography, and so he was very good at taking pictures over subsequent nights of the same sky, overlaying it, and flipping them back and forth to find objects moving against the star field. He was so good at this, he discovered hundreds of small objects and asteroids, and he was always announcing some new discovery that he had spotted in the sky, so much so that his very envious colleagues began to grumble and suggest it'd be great for Professor Wolf to take a couple weeks off and give somebody else a chance to find something. But he was the premier person for this. And in fact, the smart money would have been right, because on September 12th, 1909, he announced to the papers that he had found the returning Halley's Comet, passing across a very light nebula, which made it difficult for other astronomers to spot. Once we had some information on where it was and which way it was heading, Frank Seagrave, an American astronomer, he was an amateur astronomer and a mathematician, and he was obsessed with orbital mechanics and calculating orbits. He worked out the orbit of the incoming comet, and he announced his results to the newspapers on September 30th of 1909. And here's just a rough diagram of it coming across. On April 20th, the comet reaches perihelion, whips around the sun, and then on May 18th, 1910, the comet head is going to make its closest approach to the planet, our planet. It will pass 13 million miles from the Earth. Now, again, I'm speaking to astronomers, so you know how big that is. But again, by comparison, the moon, roughly 240,000 miles, does that sound right? Mars, 125 million. So quite a bit closer than Mars, but quite a bit further away than the moon. So it will make a reasonably close pass, but not a dangerously close pass. However, Seagrave also announced that as the comet passed, the Earth would fly through its tail. And as we're going to see, that proved to be a cause of alarm for many people. So I want to talk about 4 things that bothered people during this period. There was the threat of collision, the threat of a universal flood produced by the comet, the cosmic death ray which would be interesting. I like that. And this last one I've just touched upon, tail gas. So let's look at this first one, collision. This is Father Charles Charapin. Father Charles was a Jesuit priest, and he was also a very famous astronomer of his day. So he was a professor of astronomy at St. Louis University in Missouri. And at the end of September, Father Charapin made a trip out west from Missouri, and he was going to Flagstaff, Arizona, to the Lowell Observatory, where he was going to work with Percival Lowell. At this time, Mars was going to be fairly close to the Earth, and these two men fervently believed that Martians existed, and they wanted to see if they could see any signs of them up there on the red planet. So this is why he was going out to Arizona. However, en route, he's going to give an interview to the Las Vegas Daily Optic, Las Vegas, New Mexico, not Nevada. So this is a very, very tiny town in backwoods New Mexico. But it was a big 2-page spread because he was kind of a celebrity, and to have him here in town and get a reporter in to talk to him was very exciting. So they talked about all sorts of things and then turned the attention to the question of could a planet strike the Earth or could a comet strike the Earth? In the words of the reporter summarizing part of Father Charles's argument, while Father Charapin has no faith in the probable catastrophe of the collision of the Earth with other planets, still he firmly believes that when Jesus predicted the destruction of the Earth by fire, he had in mind such a collision. So when Jesus is prophesying the end of the Earth and the coming, the end of the Earth, the coming of his return, second coming, and the new heavens and new earth, Father Charapin seems to suggest that a comet might bring that about. Here's Father Charapin's own quote. So he is speaking here. If Halley's comet, which is almost the size of the Earth, should strike this planet, said the priest, the impact would resolve both bodies into a great pyrotechnic display from which there would be no recovery. An event similar to that will probably be the final climax in accord with the divine plans. But I do not believe that we need to worry about that just yet, as many of the prophecies of Scripture are not yet fulfilled. I do not want to be interpreted as saying anything sensational in this line, for that is not my meaning. Okay, so what is our takeaway here? A, Father Charapin thinks, yes, it's probably going to happen that a comet will plunge into the Earth and inaugurate, the destruction of our planet, fulfilling biblical prophecy. However, the prerequisite prophecies, if you will, have not yet been fulfilled, so we don't need to worry about 1910, Halley's Comet, and he doesn't want anybody to take the wrong message away from this. Right? Now we're all in agreement that's pretty much what he says here? Good. Well, the Associated Press, which is the large United States news service, picked up this obscure newspaper's little story, and I guess they didn't think it was interesting enough because they fixed it for him. Los Angeles Times, 2 days later, that the world is in grave danger of being destroyed this winter by a collision with Halley's Comet, and that this catastrophe is what Jesus Christ had in mind when he predicted the destruction of the world by fire, is the startling assertion of Reverend Charles M. Charapin, Society of Josephs of St. Louis University, one of the greatest living astronomers. Now, we're living in 1910. What's our media? Newspapers, magazines, books. But our primary source for daily news and current events are the newspapers. There's no radio. There is radio, but there's no broadcast radio yet. Radio has been invented. There's no television. There's no internet. There are no other sources of media. So if you're living in a small town somewhere, what you know about the outside world comes through your newspaper. Imagine opening your paper one morning, say October 4th, and reading one of these stories. One of the world's leading astronomers is predicting the imminent destruction of the Earth by Halley's Comet. Doesn't really matter, that's not what Father Charles Charapin said. That's what went out, and this was reprinted in hundreds and hundreds of newspapers all across the country. Would you be alarmed? Would you be concerned? If you saw something like this. This is from the Chicago Inter-Ocean, which was a big, big city newspaper, and it also had an edition that was reprinted across the West as well. And this is just typical of the coverage that happened. Well, some sensible astronomers jumped into this, including Father Daniel McHugh, professor of astronomy at DePaul University. He offered, I thought, two very interesting objections. He went at it scientifically and theologically. And so scientifically, he said, this is nonsense. Frank Seagrave has already plotted out the course of the comet. It has been examined by the world's leading astronomers and confirmed. We're pretty sure this is exactly where the comet's going to go. And it's going to pass 13 million miles from us. It's not going to be an issue. So that was the scientific case. However, theologically, I thought this was very interesting. This is Jesus speaking in Mark 13:32, but about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So no humans, himself, angels, only God knows when it's really going to happen. And it was presumptuous of any man to prophesy the end, because nobody could possibly know, only God knew. So I think that's great. He kind of fused science and theology together there in a neat little packet and put it out. So I will say, based upon this sort of pushback from the established scientific community, collision wasn't a huge concern for the most part. Most people didn't think that was going to happen, but it did have its day there in late September, early October. Universal flood. On January 12, 1910, a new comet appeared in the northern hemisphere, Comet A1910. It had been discovered in the south. Now, there weren't many observatories in the south at this time, so all the professional astronomers missed it. It was discovered actually by three miners in South Africa, and they were getting off shift one morning, and they looked, walked out of the mine, looked up, saw it, and they called the newspapers about it. But this is how the comet was discovered. It moved up, so it was visible in the north. It was very spectacular, 5 times as bright as Venus. And of course, the first thing that many people worried about was, is it Halley's Comet? Has Halley's Comet suddenly veered off course, taken a right turn in space, and is now heading right at us for some reason? Could be. Well, fortunately, the astronomers could say no, because we can still see Halley's Comet in our telescopes. It's still out there. It's not visible to the naked eye yet, but it is coming, and it's coming exactly where we think it's coming. This is just great luck. 2 amazing comets in 1 year. It's a gold rush, essentially. What a wonderful thing to happen. So we're able to get rid of that fear. However, as one fear walks off stage, another one arrives. Because on January 20th of 1910, the Seine River began to rise, and it began to flood Paris, and it rose, and it rose, and by January 30th, it crested at 30 feet 5 inches above its normal level. It was the most catastrophic flood Paris has ever experienced. It came that close from washing over the levee that guards the Louvre, and that much more, and it would have washed over and flooded the Louvre. 1/3 of downtown Paris is underwater, completely underwater. And the obvious question is, what has caused such a terrible, unprecedented flood? And there's that comet right up there in the sky, isn't there? Well, this isn't as wacky of an idea as you might think. Remember, well, some people thought that it might be like the moon, pulling up a big tidal bulge of water, which is what the moon does. And all of you are going to say, yes, but comets are far too small. But remember, Father Charpin said the head was the same size as the Earth. The reality is, astronomers in 1910 have no idea how big comet heads are. I mean, they just don't know yet. So the question is, was Comet A1910 responsible for the Paris flood? Interestingly enough, Edmund Halley himself spent some time kind of pondering the question of, did a comet cause the Genesis flood? So the one where Noah got into his boat and went drifting away. He believed that yes, if you had a large object like that, it might be able to pull up a big bulge, and that would seem, as it whipped around the Earth, like a universal deluge. So that was one possibility. Halley ultimately never resolved this question, so he didn't draw a final conclusion about it. Henri Alexandre Delandre was a French astronomer. He was the director of the Meudon Observatory. And he had a theory that a comet's tail, or comet head emits X-rays and ionizing radiation. And when that radiation struck our atmosphere, it would cause water to coalesce out of the atmosphere and form raindrops. Down comes the heavy rain and floods the earth. And so this is a way that it could cause a flood. This is Camille Flammarion, another French astronomer. We're going to speak quite a bit about him in just a minute, so just leave him out there. But Camille, his view was rain caused the flood. That was his theory. Pretty good one. Flammarion argued, in fact, that if Delandre was correct in ionizing radiation, then why aren't we getting floods all over the earth where the comet can be seen? Why only in Paris? What explains this extreme localization? Nevertheless, as Comet A1910 flew away, it did leave some people worried because Halley's Comet was going to come much closer. And would that cause an even larger, more devastating, maybe universal deluge? It could happen. So this is an open question still as we move towards May 18th. Refer back to my German school child's rhyme. Got one already, don't we? Yeah, those school children are not all wrong. Cosmic death ray. This is my favorite one, actually. This is the brainchild of New York amateur astronomer Edwin Nolte. And Nolte started to publish this widely in the American press because it was very, very exciting. He said that rather than being a gaseous tail, and I will say that most astronomers, there's still considerable debate about what a tail is and how it's formed. So that is an open question still in 1910. He said, rather than being a gaseous tail, which is what most astronomers are leaning towards, the head of a comet is actually a gaseous disk. And it's like a large magnifying glass. So it's shaped like a magnifying glass. And as it moves past the sun, it gathers the sun's solar radiation, solar energy, and protects a beam of light through it. And that is the comet's tail. I don't know how many of you spent your youth with magnifying glasses and maybe went out on the playground at breaks at school and burned things in the playground, but some people are nodding. Yes, okay. This is not an isolated experience. Good. But this was the question. What's going to happen if he is right and this cometary disk passes between the sun and the earth? Is it going to scorch a blazing path right across the face of our planet? Well, Nolte said no, it won't. And the reason it won't is because it's gaseous and it's not good at focusing energy and light. So it does a kind of a rough job. It won't scorch our Earth. It won't be intense enough to do that. However, it is going to direct a huge amount of energy right at our planet. And this is primarily going to affect things like the weather, so climatological changes, severe storms. It's also going to cause geological disturbances. So we might get volcanoes, we might get earthquakes, and in subterranean passages that are filled with explosive gases, it might set those off. So in mines or caverns, you might get underground explosions. If you're in the prediction business, sometimes you get very lucky. Because shortly after Nolte makes his prediction, Mount Etna on the island of Sicily explodes. Now, for those of you familiar with this particular volcano, you know it goes off all the time. It's a regular exploder. But this was a particularly fierce eruption, so it actually was a really big one, and it happened just with perfect timing after Nolte had announced his theory. There was also a massive earthquake in early May in Costa Rica, which leveled towns and villages, and the rivers in France began to flood again in May. So, Nolte is out ahead on points right off. Okay. Earthquakes. We've got the floods, we've got the earthquakes, right? But here's the one that really caused concern, which is what's going to happen to us when we pass through that tail if it's really gas and maybe poisonous gas of some sort of time? Is it going to asphyxiate all of us? That brings us back to Camille Flammarion. I call Camille the French Carl Sagan. And I think pretty much everybody in this room knows who Carl Sagan is, right? Carl was a gifted astronomer, but he was an even more gifted popularizer of astronomy and space sciences in general. So I remember when I was growing up, and even when I was beyond growing up, you know, Carl Sagan would be on everything. You know, he had his own TV show, he had his books, he had magazine articles, and anytime anything was happening in space, you know, network news would be cut into Carl Sagan to explain it to everybody. So he was the face of astronomy for quite a while, and for a generation, essentially. Camille Flammarion was his predecessor in that business. So Flammarion was a gifted astronomer. He had made some important discoveries about double stars and binary stars. He had done some work in meteorology, which was seen as a cognate discipline of astronomy at this time. So he'd made some genuine scientific contributions, but he was far better known for his popularizing. And so he wrote many books about astronomy for a lay audience. And this is a time of, you know, a lot of exciting things happening in astronomy. And so he writes about the solar system and how things work in the solar system, explaining, kind of integrating scientific discovery in a form that's accessible to the layperson. He wrote hundreds, probably thousands of newspapers, articles. I've never gone to count them all up, but he was very prolific in newspaper and magazine articles. He was a celebrity astronomer, late 19th, early 20th century. And if you'd pulled somebody off the street at random in 1910 and said, name an astronomer, 9 people out of 10 are going to name Camille Flammarion. If you don't know this name, what I'm going to tell you next is why. Okay, because he is on a collision course, as I say here, with a ruined reputation. So, as the comet is approaching, he begins to take on the task of providing, you know, status reports, updates, telling people where the comet is, what it's doing. And in late November, November 30th, he wrote an article for the New York Herald. The Herald had a US-based version and an international version as well. And it was a very conventional Flammarion article for almost to the end, in which he just talks about where the comet is, what it's doing, what we can expect in the coming months, basic scientific information. Then he gets to the final 3 paragraphs of his article. Yes. From the mechanical, physical, chemical, and thermodynamic viewpoints, we may at once acknowledge that we know nothing of the fate reserved for us next May. The poisoning of humanity by deleterious gases is improbable. Now, I don't know how you feel about that word, but there's a better word I think he could have used, like impossible. And impossible is really the word I want to see there. Improbable doesn't give me a lot of comfort in this situation. I don't know why he chose this word. Well, I have a theory. It's proper scientific humility, right? We speak in terms of probabilities. We never want to say black and white, absolute, you know, this is absolutely going to be the way it's going to be, because we might be proven wrong as some new information or evidence comes in. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt and saying he was just being a proper scientist by saying this. And if he had stopped right here, he probably could have walked away from it all. Unfortunately, he wrote 2 more paragraphs. And he decided to do a little thought experiment. It's improbable, but what might it be like if the improbable should come to pass? Doubtless, if the oxygen of the atmosphere combined with the hydrogen of the comet's tail, it would mean universal death with short shrift. If, on the contrary, there resulted a diminution in the supply of nitrogen, the brain of every one of us would experience an unexpected sensation of physical activity, and the human race would come to a sudden end in a paroxysm of joy, universal delirium and madness at bottom, probably overjoyed at its fate. Carbonic oxide, on the contrary, would cause universal poisoning of the lungs. So 3 improbable circumstances, right? Okay, now look. Read the last paragraph. Anxious minds have, however, no reason to be tormented, uselessly too, by these prognostications. Comet tails, it is true, are immense, but they are so light, so rarefied, that the terrestrial atmosphere is like lead in comparison. Even were our globe completely plunged into such a tail, we would, without doubt, be saved from a cataclysm by the atmospheric curtain which surrounds us. The comet might be compared to a fog through which a locomotive was dashing at full speed. Okay, so he ends on a good note, right? It's not going to happen. Without a doubt, he says. Without a doubt. Which of these 3 paragraphs do you think the newspapers pick up? Feel proud. The British press got it first. They were first across the post, out of the gates. Manchester Guardian, 1 day later. Yes, next day. Flammarion has been foretelling for Paris edition of the New York Times the dreadful things that may happen if the tail of Halley's comet envelopes the Earth. Liverpool Daily Post, Flammarion frankly declares he cannot foretell the result of such a situation. And then, yes, Nottingham Post, partial destruction of humanity is possible when we pass through the comet's tail. Well, American newspapers were not to be outdone. So quickly across the Atlantic. And there's a very strange story. This is the earliest reference I could find to this story. Actually, it came quite a few days later, 2 weeks later. Washington Post, and it's talking about the astronomers at Greenwich who now have the comet firmly in their telescopes, and they're so excited by everything they're seeing, they're just elated. And the Post wonders if this is the beginning of those paroxysms of joy that Camille Flammarion is predicting will be our downfall. But it goes from illusion to actual confusion in short order. The Los Angeles Times, world ends in March, approximately. Flammarion prophecy works havoc with the ignorant. Many Europeans take it as gospel truth. Oakland Tribune, earth calamity prophesied. This story is going to run everywhere in the United States. Almost every newspaper is going to pick it up and print it, and they're going to keep printing it over and over and over again until May 18th. They're going to continue to say that Flammarion is predicting the end of the Earth. Understand, this is the most famous astronomer on the planet at this time, a worldwide respected authority. Flammarion, for his part, when he found out what the newspapers were doing, tried to get some rebuttal out there. I would like, first of all, to warn the French and foreign journalists against the temptation to which they've already yielded, that of accusing me of announcing the end of the world for May 19th next. The end of the world will not occur on May 19th next. You can't say any clearer than that. May 19th in Europe and the UK, May 18th, evening of May 18th in the United States. It doesn't matter. He's going to write article after article, yelling from the rooftops that that's not what I said, that's not what I mean. And the newspapers are going to continue to assert that Camille Flammarion says we're all going to die. Things get a little worse in February. On February 7, 1910, astronomers at Yerkes Observatory were doing spectrographic analysis of the tail, trying to determine what the constituent elements of gas were present in there, and they discovered cyanogen gas. For those of you who are not chemists, cyanogen gas is a very close relative of cyanide, and it is used in much the same way. So it's incorporated in pesticides. It is extremely toxic. It is blue in color in its natural state, so if you have a beaker of it, it's blue in color. And it is said to have a pleasant almond smell. So if you start smelling almonds, it's time to get a little alarmed. When that result was announced, a California chemist, University of California, Berkeley, Professor Edwin Booth, jumped in. If the astronomers are right in their estimations of the amount of cyanogen gas in the tail of Halley's comet, and if that body's vapors do envelope the Earth, we may have a chance to feel the sensations of the bugs and insects which are killed by the use of this deadly gas as an exterminator. Isn't that cheery? So here comes the tail, and it's loaded with cyanogen gas. You could be alarmed. Well, I would argue that most of this, 99% of this, fault for any concerns that arose were because of the way the stories ran in the newspapers. Okay, the newspapers catalyzed this event. And actually in 1910, a man named Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Brass Check. Upton Sinclair was a very famous at the time American journalist, or American investigative journalist. His most famous book was The Jungle, which was an expose of the Chicago meatpacking industry, in which they discovered that all kinds of nasty things go into your meat. So it's very, not good. But in 1919, he decided to turn his attention to his own business, journalism. And he argued that the problem with the media of his day, and I think it still applies to the current day, is that it's corporate journalism. It's intended to make a profit for somebody. Okay, so whether that's a corporation that owns it, so many newspapers were owned by organizations like the Hearst Organization in the United States at this time, or just private publishers who own their newspapers. How do you make money in the newspaper game? You get a lot of subscribers, you get a lot of readers. So you get money through subscriptions, you get money from selling it on the street. How do you get people to buy and read your newspaper? You don't write stories about little kittens playing in the park and happy children in the playground. You write the most sensational, horrifying, shocking, you've got to read this story now. I think what they call this clickbait today, don't they? And that's how you get people to read your newspaper. And so when you have a disaster, in quotes, like Halley's Comet, this is a prime opportunity to sell a lot of papers, boost your circulation so that advertisers will pay money to put ads in your newspaper. And that's how the game works. To achieve this end, Sinclair isolated what he called 3 pernicious practices: misrepresenting the words and ideas of subjects. Father Charles Charpin, Camille Flammarion. The list is much longer than that. I can only talk about 2 of them here tonight. Fabricating stories. Yes, the newspapers made up many stories about what would happen and what had happened that were just complete fiction. And they ran them in newspapers across the country. And exaggerating the importance of a story. At its heart, the 1910 passage of Halley's Comet is an interesting science story. And it probably belongs on page 3 or 4 of your newspaper. But it's an interesting science story. It does not belong on page 1 day after day, especially in May. And I can tell you in the last week before May 18th, it's front page news every single day. But the newspapers, when they focus on a story, they make it the story. 1,000 stories are happening around us all the time. It's the ones the newspapers pick out to focus on that become the stories. Right? And they focused on Halley's Comet, turned an interesting science story into potential terrestrial cataclysm and imminent death. So the 4 doomsday scenarios received extensive newspaper coverage. They increased publisher profits, no doubt about that. People made money off this, but they produced rather predictable outcomes as well. So did people behave with a Socratic calm? Well, some did, probably most did, I would have to say, but not everybody. And so a lot of creative solutions were proposed to answer the challenge of especially the gas tail. And one of my favorites is the 3 engineers in Berkeley, California again, who decided they were going to emulate Jules Verne and his epic Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So they decided to build a large submarine, and then they and their families would board the submarine the night before the comet arrived, go down about 40 feet under the water, nice protective shield, hang out down there for a few days, come back up after the cloud and the cyanogen gases dissipated, and repopulate the Earth. There are a couple problems with this. They started working, they announced their plans in April, and the comet was coming in the middle of May, which I don't think there's a shipyard on the face of the planet, even 10 of them working together, that could build a submarine like that in 48 days. That would be a record. But the other problem is, once they announced it and word got out, friends and friends of friends and neighbors and friends of neighbors began stopping them and grabbing them and trying desperately to plead their case that they should be given a seat on the Nautilus, or the Berkeley, sorry. And it became such a tiresome thing that they abandoned the project altogether. So sadly, the Berkeley was never built. More practical, however, was the creation of gas fallout shelters, essentially. Catch back up here. And this is, I suppose, similar to nuclear fallout shelters that people built in their backyards during the Cold War. So John Marlowe, a farmer from Council Bluffs, Iowa, dug an underground shelter. This was going to be large enough to shield his family, 2 horses, 2 cows, a dog, a cat, and a number of chickens. So kind of a subterranean Noah's Ark, essentially, bring them all in 2 by 2. The other end of the spectrum, I like this guy a lot. Stephen Harder of Pasadena, California, was building a fallout shelter as well, but it was only going to be large enough for himself and a shelf of canned goods. In other words, he was going to lock his door to keep out the gases and take no one with him, because he was hoping that after the cyanogen gas cloud passed, he would be alone on Earth. And he could enjoy the Earth in peace and quiet. Sort of a hermit, I suppose we could call it. Comet hermit. In a situation where you have rising levels of anxiety, you'll always find people willing to take advantage of that. And so the con men flourished. Selling gas masks and gas filters was big business. 3 men in Houston were arrested for selling gas masks. And when the police examined their gas mask and opened up the filter cartridge, they found it was just packed with straw. So probably not a very effective defense against cyanogen gas. In Haiti, there was a very famous voodoo doctor who had perfected anti-cyanogen tablets. And if you took 2 of his tablets a day, it would protect you from cyanogen gas. And so allegedly, people were lined up down the street to purchase this wonder drug. In other places, people could come up with a clever idea of selling Comet insurance policies. So for 50 cents a week, you could buy a policy that if you were killed by the impact of a comet, it would pay $500 to your beneficiaries. Yeah, if there's an impact of the comet, not many beneficiaries are going to be around to collect. So it was really a good business when you think about it, and people were buying. There you go. Here's my favorite. In New York, saloon keepers announced that they had discovered that alcohol denatured cyanogen. And so their recommendation was, on the night of May 18th, walk into your local tavern, your local pub, and have the bartender put out a row of tumblers, fill each one to the brim with scotch, and then calmly sip the night away, secure in the knowledge that that cyanogen was just being wiped out by this barrier of alcohol. So I think that's a good one. And then we moved to the more predictable tragedies. And so we had cases of what we could call temporary insanity. Fred Bowers was a farmer in Orrville, Ohio, and in early May, he announced to his creditors he wasn't going to pay his bills. What would be the point? The comet's going to kill us all in 3 weeks, right? Why should I'm just going to spend my money on myself and have a good time while I have time left. His creditors were unamused, and they phoned the police, and the police arrested him. Fred was shouting in his jail cell, railing away about, we're all going to die, so they brought a psychiatrist in to examine him. The psychiatrist decided he had temporary insanity, and he was remanded to the state mental hospital in Ohio. A number of people suffered a similar fate. Then you had the really marvelous story of extreme contrition. So on the afternoon of May 18th, just before the comet was to arrive, Luigi Ciaffici, he was a member of the Italian Black Hand, kind of an offshoot of the mafia in New Jersey. He walked into his local police station and confessed that he had killed another man named Patrick Cahill. Now this was the perfect crime. Cahill had vanished 10 days earlier, and nobody knew what had happened to him. Most people thought he'd just gone away somewhere, just drifted out of town and headed off somewhere else. The police had no clues. They didn't even know if a murder had been committed until Ciaffici walks in and confesses the crime. He said, "Yep, I killed him. You'll find his body buried beneath my pig pen." And when the police went and excavated the site, sure enough, there was Thomas Cahill. the police asked, "Why did you do this? You know, it was a perfect crime. Why would you do this?" And he said, "Because I know we're all going to die tonight. And I can't face the heavenly judge with this terrible sin on my conscience, so I want to confess my sin, get it off my chest, essentially, so that I might still have a hope of heaven." Okay. And then, more sadly, there were many suicides. So many people killed themselves, unwilling to face the horrors of asphyxiation in this terrible comet gas. They said it would be far better just to end their own lives. The first American suicide was a young woman named Ruby Woolfield. She lived in Yakima, Washington. Excuse me. And on the morning of April 5th, she told her husband to watch the baby. She was going to go out and check the mail. So she went out, and about an hour passed, and she hadn't come back. And thought, "Oh, that's very strange. It doesn't take that long to go to the mail." And he walked out, looked around, looked down to the river. Their house was on the banks of the Yakima River. Saw her standing there. He looked away at something else, and when he looked back, she was gone. And when he went down to the river, he found that she had cast herself in and killed herself. And her neighbors later said that she had been obsessed with the comet and all the stories that she was reading, and was certain that she was going to die in that and wanted to avoid that fate. She was the first. She was not the last. There were many others. I think suicides fall under the category of dire things, so I'm going to claim that for my rhyme here. The Earth did pass through the comet's tail on May 18, 1910. Did not harm the planet. This whole presentation has a big spoiler already built into it, because you already know the ending, right? What you may not know, however, I'm sorry to say this has been a bit Amerocentric here tonight, and you may be asking yourself, well, how did the British do during this time of stress? So I've put on the British addendum here for you. And looked at quite a few British newspapers from this period, and I would say that the majority of them tend to gravitate around the idea of it being an interesting science story. So you get a lot of science news, and this typically isn't front page science news. It's buried several pages back in the paper. But this is very typical of the coverage of this time. Stories like this one. Professor Herbert H. Turner was an Oxford Don, delivered the 1910 Alderwood Lecture at the Royal College of Arts in early May. And he talked about Halley's Comet and what we could expect when it came. He completely debunked the idea that it would do anything to us, of course. But he did offer some very interesting thoughts about the tail, which again kind of points to the fact that nobody knows much about comets at this time. He believed, for instance, that the comet's tail is always present. And the reason we don't see it is because we're at the Earth and we're looking out as coming towards us, and the head is blocking the view of the tail as it approaches. Only when it passes by that we can see the tail. We now, of course, know that is not correct. He said that when the tail sweeps over us, it's not going to kill us. The gases will not kill us. The atmosphere will protect us, but we might see electrical disturbances. So it might interfere with, what fairly primitive electrical devices that are on hand at this time. The tail might trail a huge cloud of meteors behind it, so we might see increased meteor activity at this stage. And again, he's not really sure how a comet's tail is formed or what a comet's tail is, and his theory is that somehow it gathers up what he called solar ejecta. So I don't know if it sort of hoovers up things from the surface of the sun that it then throws backwards. He's not clear on that. But again, it does point to the fact that nobody really knows for sure what a comet's tail is. Second major theme, poking fun at foreigners. This comes up a lot, I will say. And so, yes, the British press was more than delighted to point out the foibles of all the other nations and their terrors and fears that were beginning to arise. And so they're going to take shots in this from the Daily Telegraph, Italy. The Italians are evidently going nuts. The French, what do you expect? Sorry. India, China, Russia, Turkey, everybody's going nuts there, but they're uncivilized people, so what do you expect? And then the Americans. And the Daily Telegraph began running kind of a daily feature, notes from America about Halley's Comet in the last week, and they got a lot of amusement out of it. America has cometitis. Half the space in every newspaper is devoted to the observations of distinguished astronomers on your side of the Atlantic, as well as on this, while the other half describes the lay attitude towards the approach of the heavenly traveler. Fantastic incidents are everywhere being attributed to the comet. Rural correspondents are flooding the wires with tale of poultry laying and cackling after midnight under the mystic spell of the celestial visitor. Barnyard animals sit all night long on fences watching for the comet and pointing it out to their progeny. How many of you are familiar with Gary Larson and the Far Side Comet? I just think of his amazing cows. I can just see a row of Larson cows sitting on top of a barbed wire fence and hooves all pointing up there and little cows, little O's for mouths down there. I have not encountered any stories in my exhaustive research to suggest that anybody said livestock were sitting on fences and pointing up. Who knows where that came from. However, I would argue that we really don't know exactly what the British would have done in those final weeks because another newspaper story overshadowed the comet's arrival. Does anybody know what that newspaper story was?
Titanic? Titanic?
May 1910. Yeah.
Neptune?
Nope. I'll give you a clue. Death of King Edward VII. King Edward VII died on May 6, 1910. Lay in state from the 14th to the 19th, and his funeral was May 20th. Guess what the British newspapers were covering? In a 20-page newspaper, the first 14 pages are all about King Edward and the funeral, every day, every single day. They're just, the funeral coverage, what's going to happen, about the heir, the passing of the throne, yeah. It was a huge story, and the comet just got shoved clear to the back of the papers, and it might as well have never passed. In fact, it was overcast the morning of May 19th when the comet's tail swept the UK. There was a fantastic thunderstorm, however, in London. Biggest thunderstorm ever, supposedly. So you did have that. Did the comet cause the death of King Edward VII? 3 stories here talking about that and debunking that notion, but they do mention superstitious people all over England who are connecting the arrival of Halley's Comet and the death of King Edward VII. So maybe not everybody in the UK was completely rational on this question. It always brings death to kings. All right, that brings me to the end of the talking part. Just want to point out just a couple things for you. I think we said on the website there would be books available for sale. Unfortunately, I'm traveling through 17 different venues in 25 days. On trains, planes, buses, and I can't carry big boxes of books with me. So if you are interested in Comet Madness or would like to procure a copy of your own, you could click on this handy link here or go to richardjgoodrich.com and you will find a page with handy links to US booksellers and also UK booksellers, which would facilitate that. I've left business cards out on the table where you picked up your badges before you came in. And so you could pick up that if you didn't want to mess with us right now, just take one of those cards away with you. I will say that Comet Madness it's a really good book. And the Christmas shopping season is coming. It's upon us. Did you know that? It makes a perfect Christmas gift. So buy one for yourself and 5 or 6 more for people you love. One more thing I want to mention is that I do have a monthly newsletter called What's New in Old News. And there is a sign-up sheet right by those business cards out there. So if you thought you'd like to hear more from me about other things I'm working on, it's kind of history, travel, other odd things that I toss in from time to time. Comes once a month, the first day of every month. It's completely free, and if you hate it, you just unsubscribe. So there's no risk, no harm, no foul. I think that's about all I have. Anybody has some questions, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I have to say, as you'll know, there are a number of people who do presentations on comets, but I don't think you'll find anyone giving a presentation as lovely and entertaining as Richard's.
Thank you.
So, and indeed, as a professional speaker, I have to say that your presentation style is excellent. You keep the audience interested in the topic. And I also, it's very obvious that your research for this presentation has been quite exemplary. So do we have any speakers, first of all, in the audience?
I noticed that some of your example astronomers were men of religion.
Yes.
Were you able to come to any conclusions as to whether whether religion was liable to cause a difference of opinion from those who had no religion in considering the comet and its possible effects?
Among the professional astronomers or amongst the laity?
Professionals.
Amongst the professionals, I don't think so. And again, Father Charles Charpin, even though he gets railroaded into being, yes, the comet's going to strike and kill us all, that's not what he said, and he didn't believe it was going to happen. Now, he does believe it's going to happen eventually, and that's his religious view. And Father Daniel McHugh was having none of it whatsoever. So I think the two examples of priest scientists that I brought in both seem refreshingly normal, if that's an appropriate thing to say. But I mean, I don't think. Now, that's not to say, however, that there weren't a lot of people who said, yes, actually, this comet is going to, and we can see it clearly in the Bible that it's going to happen. And there is a big uptick in religion at this point. So at the night of the comet's arrival, May 18th, the churches and synagogues in Chicago, for instance, were filled, just standing room only. And this was kind of the same all across the United States.
You mentioned dire things and the like. Was there an increase in the amount of, I'm thinking of things like vengeful acts and people saying, right, it doesn't matter if I go and do bad things because there's not going to be time to, what's the word? Not going to be time to be held to account.
Yeah. I can't think of any, and that seems, and as you mentioned that seems like a very odd thing because, yes, it would seem like an ideal opportunity to do it. There are the things that are closest to quasi-criminal activities tend to be pranks on the night of May 18th. So people, for instance, fill up large balloons with hydrogen and attach magnesium coil to it and set them up, and then here's this big fireball. And this is at a time when people are freaking out. But this is more what kids, teenagers like to get up to. I cannot think of any criminal activity with the expectation that you wouldn't be held to account for that criminal activity.
Okay, I'm surprised, but that's probably a positive reflection on people.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions from the room? Okay. Well, in that case, all I can do is say once again, thank you very, very much, Richard, for a marvellous presentation, and I'm sure you'd all like to, again, show your appreciation. And I'm going to pass back to Alan for our final announcements.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you very much indeed again, Richard. A few announcements just before we disappear. There's a few things happening before our next meeting. There will be on the newsletters that come out, but if I flag them up now, you can be sort of ready for them. The first one is the Institute of Physics lectures, which are held in the room next door. On November the 1st, Wednesday, November the 1st, Catherine Regan is giving a talk about Mars exploration and the influence of dust. Now, I'm sure that's something that's going to be of interest to all of our members. If you want to go to that, go onto the website, look on the IOP page and click on the bit email Diane, and you can reserve yourself a place for that one. Also in that week, on the Friday, Bayford-Bury Observatory are holding the first of their open evenings for the season. We go along, our club goes along there to represent Hertford Astronomy Group, obviously for a recruitment campaign, also though to sort of share the love and fun of astronomy with the people who go there. We tend to set up two areas, one inside to do the sort of face-to-face talking, and another one outside down by the domes. So if any of you fancy bringing along your telescopes and joining us down at the domes, we can show members of the public just what they can see through a back garden telescope. Let's hope that it's going to be clear so we can do that. So that's on November the 3rd. Again, if you go onto the website, there is a space there where you can click and say you would like to come along. I didn't mention, of course, if you come along as a member of HAG, you get in free. And finally, the last announcement to say that our next meeting is on Wednesday, November the 8th, when students from the University of Hertfordshire will be giving presentations. We're hoping to get 3 people to come along, and I know those of you who've been to them in the past have found them very exciting, different styles of presentation, quite a lot of fun, and so again, that's something to put in your diary. We will be sending out all those details on newsletters, but you might want to make a note of them. All that needs to be said now is a big thank you to all of you, the audience, for coming along tonight to the university, to all you people on Zoom. I'm sure you've had a really good time there as well. And a very special thank you to all the members of the committee who put so much work into getting these presentations here and on Zoom to go so smoothly. So do have a safe journey home, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future meeting. Thank you and good night.